Many people probably recognize this scene or image, but what many people do not recognize is the magician behind this film and the person who pioneered movie magic.
Georges Melies' legacy began in the 1890s as an innovative magician who quickly joined the fast-growing ranks of the film industry.
He transformed storytelling and movie production, eventually becoming a leader known as the Godfather of movie magic.
Melies was also the first person to create a horror movie, a vampire movie, a science fiction movie, and many other types of films.
Georges Melies was born on December 8, 1861 in Paris, France. Georges was the third child of footwear manufacturer Jean-Louis Stanislas Melies, and Melies attended secondary school Lycée Louis-le-Grand in Paris, graduating in 1880. One of Melies' biggest influences was the magician Jean-Eugène Robert Houdin, and Melies was first introduced to stage magic in the early 1880s. In 1888, Melies purchased the old theatre Robert Houdin. He reopened the famous theatre and used it for almost the rest of his life for his work as a stage magician. During the 1800s, the two biggest names in the photography business were the Lumiere brothers and Thomas Edison. Brothers Louis and Auguste Lumiere ran a studio in Paris and researched photography. In 1895, they created the cinematograph. What this device did was create both a negative and a positive of a series of images, and it could project them with light to create a stop-motion moving picture with 12 frames a second. On December 28, 1895, in the Grand Café of Paris, the Lumiere brothers invited a small group of special guests to their first public screening of one of the world's first films. Among the guests attending was Georges Melies. After the screening, Melies contacted the Lumiere brothers concerning obtaining a camera of his own. The Lumiere brothers did not allow this, but since one of the characteristics that made him a leader was that he was hardworking, Melies did not stop there. He eventually developed a camera of his own and began to incorporate film into his magic acts.
Another advantage of Melies' background in magic was that he was able to bring innovative techniques to filmmaking.
Special effects and movie production are the two areas of the film industry that Georges Melies has had the greatest impact on.
You make a film and a story around it and take people to another world. That was what interested me, but then the reason I was seeing those things, the reason I was seeing Star Wars, the reason I was seeing all these special effects films was basically because Melies.
Some tricks that Melies pioneered are stopping and starting the camera to make things appear and disappear, superimposing two strips of film by putting them together so you can make things look strange or magical, and hand tinting the film to give a sense of color to objects and people that appear in his films. One example of his disappearing tricks is in the film The Vanishing Lady. In this film, he makes a woman disappear and reappear by only using a chair, a cloth, and his amazing tricks. The Man with the Rubber Head is a film by Georges Melies where he superimposed a film strip of his head getting closer and further away from the camera onto a film strip of a man blowing air through a tube leading onto an empty platform. The result is a man's head sitting upright on the platform, and as the man blows air through the pipe, the head appears to inflate. In 1902, Georges Melies created his most famous film to date, A Trip to the Moon, which was loosely based off the novel From Earth to the Moon by Jules Verne and The First Men in the Moon by H.G. Wells. In this film, which was considered lengthy for its time, he shows the audience the first men to travel to the moon. Throughout the film, the men make contact with alien creatures and such, but the most amazing part about it is that it was the first film to be in full color. The color was created through his hand tinting methods, but surprisingly the colored film wasn't discovered until 1993 and debuted at the 2011 Cannes Film Festival. He would later move on to be a leader of the industry, learning how to manipulate film to create stunning visuals and to seemingly alter time and the universe to create elaborate stories.
Georges Melies made documentaries, comedies, horror movies, vampire movies, science fiction movies, dramas, and fairy tales. He was the first person to tell stories through film, rather than just filming everyday events, and was the first filmmaker to use sets, which he created and painted himself. He made his first film, Card Party, in 1896. It was a short silent film featuring just 3 actors playing cards. This was the first of more than 500 films that Melies would make between 1896 and 1913, which he financed, directed, choreographed, and acted. He discovered the first trick of cinematography early on when his camera jammed while filming traffic around the Place de l'Opéra in Paris. The jam taught Melies that he could create illusions in film. Melies quickly became known as a cinemagician.
Most of what we see in filmmaking, you can also find it 100 years ago in Georges Melies.
Near the end of 1896, Melies founded the Star Film Company with Lucien Rolos. This, being the world's first film company made solely for filmmaking, was a huge step forward for both Melies and the film world. Later that year, he also built the world's first film studio in the garden of his Montreuil, France home. The studio provided perfect ambient lighting for his films. He hit the peak of his international popularity in 1902. He made Red Riding Hood and Bluebeard, and then his most famous film, A Trip to the Moon, which was the first big-budget film ever made.
The expansion of film in the early 1900s and the ensuing competition was what controlled the latter part of Melies' career. Melies was the leader of the European film industry and was a major contributor to its existence as popular culture.
Well, Melies was probably the biggest name in filmmaking during the first decade of cinema.
However, Melies was emulated and pirated by his competitors. A Trip to the Moon was pirated all over the world without the Star Film Company logo and caused Melies to only gain a fraction of the film's profit. Thus, Melies sent his brother Gaston to New York to get his films a U.S. copyright. Thomas Edison was the leader of the American film industry at the time and started the Motion Picture Patents Company, a company that Star Film was forced to join in order to maintain competition in the American market. Due to the abundance of theaters being founded in America, Melies was forced to produce 1,000 feet of film per week. Edison then used this film and took some of the profit away from Melies. Also, the fact that his films were so extravagant made them much more expensive than others. Therefore, less and less of Melies' films were sold. By 1912, Melies' films were virtually ignored at release, and he was on the verge of bankruptcy. He was forced to stop production due to lack of funds.
So I think he had a big impact on the film industry, but he was left behind by the film industry.
World War I began in 1914, and in 1917, he experienced one of the most harmful effects on his career. The Army requisitioned his studio to make a hospital and seized 400 of his films, which were melted to be used for boot heels. Star Film began its demise, and in 1923, Melies sold his studio to creditors. In 1925, he remarried and bought a toy and sweet stand in Gare Montparnasse, which he ran until 1932. In 1929, some of his films were rediscovered and were shown on December 16th of that year in the Salle Pleyel, which was a gala in honor of Melies. In 1931, he was awarded the Cross of the Legion of Honor, and in 1932, he was granted an apartment in Orly. However, Melies had difficulty keeping up a steady life and lived in poverty until he passed away from cancer on January 21st, 1938.
Melies could never shake off what happened to him during the war. He lived out his life at home until he passed away forgotten. It was not until many years later that he was rediscovered.
The epic filmmakers who are the stars today and the ones that are coming up the ladder for tomorrow, they all know about Melies. He's the godfather of magic.
Georges Melies' legacy can be seen today in the modern film industry. He made the first film company and studio, and he was the first filmmaker to tell stories, with casts, sets, multiple locations in one film, and animation. He pioneered special effects that are still used by modern filmmakers today. And not only did he bring film to the working class, but he made his movies so that they were entertaining for his audiences.
He revolutionized magic in cinema, and on his grave today is written, creator of cinematographic spectacles. He was the original cinemagician, and changed the course of one of the most popular types of entertainment today. In conclusion, Georges Melies was a very influential figure in the creation of film, who made the film industry what it is today.